He spent 20 years building bridges that would never collapse, but never noticed the cracks forming inside his own home. When a devoted father and brilliant engineer returns home early from a business trip, he discovers a secret so devastating it rewrites his entire life. But instead of breaking, he quietly begins dismantling the perfect lie his wife and her lover spent 18 years building, and what follows is a masterclass in cold, calculated revenge. This is not just a story about betrayal, it's about precision, justice, and what happens when you underestimate the wrong man. Logan Pierce guided his sleek Audi through the peaceful neighborhoods of Brookhaven, a quiet town nestled near the mountains of Oregon. The early evening sun bathed the suburban landscape in gold as he approached his immaculate two-story brick home. After completing the massive San Diego infrastructure project 2 weeks ahead of schedule, Logan allowed himself a rare moment of pride. He had spent 2 decades in structural engineering, earning a sterling reputation for solving complex problems with relentless precision. Bridges, skyscrapers, tunnels. His work stood as silent monuments to his obsession with perfection. At 47, Logan was a picture of discipline and quiet strength. His tall, lean frame reflected years of early morning gym routines and carefully balanced meals. His steel-gray eyes, always alert, had prevented countless project failures through microscopic attention to detail. It was this same attention he had applied to building what he believed was a secure and happy home for his wife Ruby and their 3 children, Ethan, Clara, and Ryan. As his house came into view, Logan noticed the red Lexus belonging to Ruby parked beside Ethan's modest sedan. A deliberate decision, he'd insisted Ethan buy his first car to learn the value of responsibility, even though the family could easily afford more. The house itself was pristine, with neatly trimmed hedges and not a leaf out of place. Everything in Logan's world reflected order. But that Sunday evening, something felt off. The house was unusually quiet. No faint piano melody from Clara's bedroom, no gaming sounds echoing from Ryan's room, and no laughter from the kitchen. Logan retrieved his briefcase from the trunk. Inside were signed contracts that would solidify another multi-million-dollar project for his firm. He smiled to himself, eager to share the news. When he stepped through the side door, everything appeared in place. He took pride in maintaining the smallest details. No squeaky hinges, no chipped paint, no disarray. As he passed the foyer, soft voices drifted down from the second floor. He instinctively slowed, recognizing Ruby's voice first. Something in her tone, too triumphant, too unfamiliar, made him pause mid-step. She was speaking with Ethan. What Logan heard next shattered the illusion of his life. Ruby was calmly discussing the results of a paternity test, her voice saturated with cold satisfaction. According to her, not one of the children was biologically Logan's. She spoke of using his devotion to the family and his long work hours as a shield for an affair she had carefully maintained for nearly 2 decades with Don Harper, their longtime family physician and someone Logan had once called a friend. The conversation revealed more than just betrayal. Ruby had calculated every step. She and Don had orchestrated a long-term plan. Manipulate medical appointments to cover meetings, fabricate stories for mutual friends, and eventually extract everything from Logan through a carefully timed divorce. Their ultimate goal was to wait until Ethan's college fees were paid, then take the house, the assets, and start fresh, unburdened. As Logan remained frozen at the base of the stairs, his mind didn't react emotionally. Instead, it began to process the information like a stress fracture in a foundation, methodically, analytically. He rewound memories like inspection footage. The shared meals, the school events, the family holidays where Don had been a familiar presence. They all now reeked of deceit. Even more chilling was Ruby's complete disregard for the children's emotions. When Ethan, in the recorded conversation, expressed hesitation about their younger siblings learning the truth, she dismissed it with cold detachment. According to her, Don was their real father, and they would adapt. Logan returned to his study like a man walking through a ruin he once built. The family portraits along the hallway now felt like scenes from a scripted performance. In each image, he could see the subtle clues he had ignored. Don's hand too comfortably on Ruby's shoulder, the resemblance he had once attributed to Ruby's side of the family now undeniable. That evening, Logan joined dinner as he always did. He followed every part of his normal routine with mechanical precision, cutting food, nodding at small talk, answering questions about his business trip with a steady voice. Ruby played her role as a loving wife flawlessly. The children, unaware of the afternoon's revelations, filled the dining room with light conversation. Only Ethan's eyes occasionally met Logan's with a hint of something darker: guilt, fear, or maybe remorse. Later that night, as the house sank into silence, Logan sat alone in his study surrounded by the credentials of his career. Every certificate, every framed article praising his professional accomplishments now seemed ironic. He had been trained to detect weaknesses, to prevent collapse, to anticipate disaster before it struck. Yet he had failed to detect the structural failure within the very walls of his own life. But unlike a compromised bridge or a cracked beam, this time he wouldn't prevent the fall. He would make sure it collapsed, and that the ones responsible would be caught beneath the rubble. Logan Pierce was a man of systems. Just as he approached engineering problems with calculated precision, he now turned that same discipline toward dismantling the carefully constructed illusion his wife had maintained for years. The betrayal had cut deep, but instead of succumbing to emotion, Logan had slipped into a cold, focused mode of operation. The structural engineer inside him had reawakened, not to build something but to take it apart piece by piece. Each night after his family went to sleep, he sat in his home office with the door closed, the lights dimmed, and a single monitor illuminated in front of him. What had once been the hub of project designs and infrastructure blueprints had become the control center for something far more personal: the complete unraveling of a lie that had spanned nearly 2 decades. He began with the financials. Using years of archive statements, Logan traced small, consistent transfers from joint accounts into private ones under Ruby's name. The pattern had gone unnoticed due to the modest amounts and the frequency, always just under the threshold of suspicion. But over the years, they added up. It was clear now that Ruby had been quietly draining their resources with surgical efficiency. Every transaction was logged, categorized, and compared. Logan created spreadsheets with timestamps, cross-referencing them against his business trips and project deadlines. She had waited until he was out of town to make most of the withdrawals, another calculated move. The data confirmed what he already knew. This wasn't a spontaneous affair. It was a scheme. With the financials documented, he turned to digital evidence. Using knowledge gained from years of handling high-security architectural software, Logan accessed Ruby's laptop without her knowledge. Her password, a mix of their youngest son's birthdate and her middle name, reflected a disturbing level of confidence. She didn't believe she'd ever be discovered. What he found inside her inbox left no doubt. Email threads between Ruby and Don Harper detailed appointment cover-ups, timelines, and emotional manipulation tactics. Their coordination was disturbingly meticulous. They had planned every step, even referring to Logan in mockingly detached terms: the provider, the workhorse, our funding plan. One message casually discussed the children's school performances as obstacles to be handled carefully until graduation. The betrayal deepened with each message, yet Logan remained outwardly unchanged. At breakfast, he complimented Ruby on her cooking. At dinner, he asked Ethan about his college applications. He remained involved in Clara's music practice and Ryan's science projects, all while compiling an airtight archive of evidence. A discreet inquiry led him to Caleb Knox, a seasoned divorce attorney known in Westbrook's legal circles for handling complex asset protection and custody battles. They met in Caleb's private office on the 15th floor of a downtown building, a structure Logan had helped design a decade earlier. As the city's skyline shimmered behind them, Logan placed a thick file on the lawyer's desk. Inside were annotated bank statements, saved emails, encrypted USB backups, and timelines that linked everything. Caleb flipped through them, his expression shifting from curiosity to admiration. "This is more organized than anything I've seen from forensic investigators," the attorney remarked. Logan merely nodded, replying that precision was his nature. He made one thing clear: protecting the children came first. Biological connection or not, they were his in every way that mattered. Caleb agreed and outlined a plan to establish ironclad trust funds that would ensure the children's futures were secure, untouchable by Ruby or Dawn under any circumstance. Meanwhile, subtle shifts began to unfold at home. Ruby's demeanor changed. She took more private phone calls in the bathroom, scheduled mysterious appointments, and kept her phone face down on the table. Logan observed without interference. Her body language, restless fingers, frequent glances toward him, and brief moments of silence betrayed rising anxiety. Something in her sensed a shift, even if she couldn't name it. Don, too, made his move. One afternoon, Logan received a call at his office. The voice on the other end was unmistakably forced in its cheerfulness. Don inquired about Logan's health, suggesting he come in for a routine checkup. It was thinly veiled concern, but Logan understood its purpose. They were testing the waters, trying to detect whether he suspected anything. He responded politely and declined the offer. The interaction, while brief, confirmed that they were accelerating their timeline. Ruby's whispers behind closed doors became more frequent. Late one evening, as Logan worked quietly in his study, he heard her hissing into the phone in the next room. Panicked, anxious. She told Dawn that something felt wrong, that Logan seemed distant, too quiet, too composed. Dawn's voice, faint but audible through the thin walls, tried to reassure her. "He's predictable," Dawn said. "Too methodical to act emotionally. He doesn't even know how to play dirty." Logan sat still, recording every word. What they didn't realize was that the same qualities they'd mocked, his orderliness, his discipline, his restraint, were now being used to orchestrate their downfall. Ruby believed she had all the leverage. Dawn believed he had covered every trace. But neither of them accounted for the possibility that Logan would discover everything before they struck, and that he wouldn't react with rage but with strategy. Every system they had built together was now being used against them. They had spent years designing a fantasy. Logan was now designing its collapse. The following days passed with deceptive normalcy. From the outside, Logan Pierce's life appeared unchanged. He arrived at work each morning in his usual tailored suits, engaged in project briefings, and led his team through high-level structural planning meetings. Yet behind that calm exterior, he orchestrated a methodical takedown of the lie he had once called his marriage. The financial documents were now bulletproof. Every detail was accounted for, each unauthorized transfer traced, each expense connected to Ruby Allen's secret savings account, and each timestamp mapped to Logan's business trips. His next step was securing his children's future beyond the reach of those who had used them as pawns. He finalized the trust funds with Caleb Knox. Each one was crafted to protect a specific path: education, housing, career development. These trusts existed outside the scope of the marital estate, making them untouchable in the event of divorce litigation. Logan was ensuring that Clara, Ethan, and Ryan would never suffer for the sins of others. The deeper he delved into Ruby's digital trail, the more careless her behavior seemed. She and Don Harper had grown overconfident, relying on Logan's quiet consistency to shield their deception. Logan discovered an entire archive of emails on Ruby's cloud backup, a location she had apparently forgotten to log out from. One message stood out: a discussion between Don and Ruby about fabricating medical records, with references to Logan's emotional distance to justify future claims. They were setting up an abuse narrative. He knew the strategy well. As a man of few outward emotions, it was easy to misconstrue his restraint as coldness. Ruby intended to use this against him, to twist his silence into guilt. Logan immediately began preparing a timeline of every alleged incident they might fabricate. His calendar, phone records, flight confirmations, and even home security logs painted a clear picture of his whereabouts. He included photographs from public appearances, timestamps from engineering conferences, and security badge entries from client buildings, all forming an unbreakable alibi. The next move came swiftly. One Thursday morning, Logan received a formal notice from local authorities. A domestic misconduct report had been filed in his name. The accusations were vague, cleverly constructed to imply emotional manipulation and controlling tendencies, not physical abuse. This tactic made them difficult to disprove, relying instead on hearsay and manufactured context. Logan remained composed. He met with Detective Lila Moreno, who had been assigned the case. As he laid out his evidence, neatly organized into indexed folders, her initial skepticism melted into professional admiration. The timeline invalidated every claim. The supporting documents revealed the motive behind the false report. Audio recordings of Ruby and Don discussing their plan were especially damning. Detective Moreno summarized the situation concisely. The complaint appeared retaliatory, made in anticipation of a legal battle Ruby knew she would lose. Within 2 days, the complaint was dismissed. That same evening, Logan received an urgent call from his bank. The branch manager, Bradley Morton, informed him that Ruby had attempted to withdraw a substantial amount from the joint accounts. All of them. Fortunately, the protections Logan and Caleb had already put in place triggered immediate freezes. Logan thanked the manager and returned to his study, where the evidence pile continued to grow. When Ruby discovered the accounts were frozen, her carefully maintained composure cracked for the first time. She stormed into Logan's office, demanding to know what he had done. Her voice, once smooth and calculating, now trembled with frustration. Logan responded with quiet precision, reminding her that secrecy had consequences. When she warned him that he'd regret making enemies, he simply added the encounter to his growing digital record. That same night, Ruby tried another route, desperation masked as manipulation. She attempted to reframe her actions as misunderstood loyalty, claiming that everything she had done was for the children's benefit. Logan didn't argue. He had no reason to. The facts stood firm on their own. From that point forward, Ruby's actions became increasingly erratic. She made late-night calls to Dawn, whispers echoing from the kitchen, each one more urgent than the last. Logan overheard fragments about speeding up their plan, legal filings, and making sure the narrative reached the right ears before Logan's side of the story did. What Ruby failed to grasp was that the story had already shifted. The people they relied on, their family, doctor friends, social acquaintances, even neighbors, began to pick up on the inconsistencies. Logan, calm and ever-present, continued being the same steady force he always had been. Meanwhile, Ruby's constant secrecy and abrupt mood swings painted a picture she hadn't intended. One evening, after putting Ryan to bed, Logan listened through his study walls as Ruby frantically told Dawn that everything was unraveling. Her voice broke with panic as she mentioned Ethan acting distant, Clara asking questions, and Logan being too calm. Dawn, still confident, reassured her that nothing could go wrong, that all their plans had accounted for this. But they hadn't. They had planned for a man who would break. Instead, they had underestimated one who builds, and more dangerously, one who knows how to let things collapse only when the timing is perfect. The morning of Ethan Pierce's high school graduation began with quiet precision. Logan Pierce stood in the kitchen of the home he had built, surrounded by silence and calm intention. On the marble island lay an organized display of documentation, DNA results, signed divorce papers, and 3 sealed envelopes marked with each child's name. Each page represented a turning point, each letter a carefully composed truth. Caleb Knox had filed the necessary legal documents the day prior. The accusations of abuse had been officially dismissed, and Logan's financial assets were protected. The trust funds were activated, untouchable by anyone but the intended children. Ruby Allen had been locked out of every account she had once siphoned from. The house mortgage had been reassigned. The bank accounts frozen. The credit cards revoked. Logan had packed his essentials the night before, leaving only furniture and memories behind. He intended this day to be the last chapter of his old life. Ruby descended the stairs just after 7 a.m., wearing a designer dress Logan recognized from an upscale boutique receipt months prior. The same receipt had once felt like a small indulgence. Now it represented a tool of manipulation. She stopped short at the sight of the documents spread across the counter. Her expression flickered, confusion, realization, then dread. Logan said little. He simply pushed the folder containing the DNA results forward. Ruby's face paled as she scanned the contents, recognizing what they meant. In that moment, the carefully constructed confidence she had displayed for years began to fracture. The children entered the kitchen one by one. Ethan, dressed in his graduation gown, paused as the tension settled like fog. Clara and Ryan followed, their expressions shifting from curiosity to concern. Logan didn't speak immediately. Instead, he handed each of them their respective envelope, allowing the written words to carry the burden of explanation. The letters contained everything. Financial records showing Ruby's years of concealed transfers. Email correspondence between her and Don Harper. Medical data revealing paternity falsification. Most importantly, they contained Logan's words, thoughtfully written reflections on his love for them and his commitment to their futures, regardless of DNA. To Ethan, he expressed pride, not for academic success, but for the strength of character his son had shown even amid silent turmoil. He included confirmation of the college trust fund, ensuring his education would never be a bargaining chip. To Clara, he acknowledged her creativity and passion for the arts. He had created a separate account supporting her aspirations, free from the judgment Ruby had always shown toward her impractical interests. For Ryan, he provided tickets to a gaming convention they had planned to attend, now a symbolic gesture of constancy in a shifting world. His letter reminded Ryan that family was not about biology but about choice, consistency, and love. Ruby, realizing the implications, attempted to seize the documents, her voice rising in protest. But Logan had anticipated this. Every paper had copies, secure, encrypted, and already in Caleb's possession. The final blow came with perfect timing. As Ruby's phone buzzed, Logan stepped back. She answered instinctively. Don's voice spilled through the speaker, audible to the room. His tone, panicked, informed her that the medical board had suspended his license. His attempt to access Logan's medical records to fabricate abuse evidence had been traced. Internal audits exposed not only falsified documents but other long-buried ethical violations. Ruby's expression contorted as she realized the collapse had already begun. Logan calmly announced his departure. He had arranged for the house utilities to be transferred, the mortgage to be severed from her access, and her lines of credit to expire by noon. His shares in the engineering firm were now locked within a protected trust, immune to divorce proceedings. She would be left with what remained, an empty house and the consequences of her choices. At precisely 9 a.m., Caleb arrived at the door with final paperwork. His tone was professional, his demeanor impassive as he outlined the legal outcomes Ruby now faced. Fraud, financial misconduct, collusion with a third party to fabricate legal claims. Throughout the exchange, the children stood quietly, reading the letters their father had prepared. Ethan's jaw was tense, Clara's hands trembled, and Ryan's eyes darted between his parents. And yet, none of them protested. None of them moved toward Ruby. They had been given the truth and were now free to choose what to do with it. Logan said nothing more. His part was done. He walked out of the house he had once built for a family that had never truly existed, leaving behind not just walls and belongings, but the woman who had tried to replace truth with manipulation. He did not look back. 5 years had passed since Logan Pierce left the house he once believed held his future. In those years, he built something stronger and far more lasting than anything had ever drafted on blueprints. His new life in Seattle was marked by clarity, purpose, and peace. No longer haunted by deception, he had transformed personal devastation into a legacy of quiet triumph. Wilson Pierce Engineering had expanded significantly, now with offices in 6 major cities. Logan's innovations in sustainable design and structural resilience were featured in trade journals and university programs. One of his most celebrated achievements, a suspension bridge that combined beauty and engineering precision, was considered a modern marvel. But the milestones that mattered most to him weren't found in concrete or steel. His children had chosen him. It began with Ethan. Logan was in his office overlooking Elliott Bay when his secretary, Junie, announced a visitor. The young man standing in the doorway bore the height and bone structure of Don Harper, but the eyes, the sense of quiet integrity, were pure Logan. Ethan had come alone, carrying no accusations, just questions. The conversation that followed was honest, steady, and grounded in mutual respect. Ethan spoke of Ruby's decline, the loss of the house, her job folding clothes at a department store, and Don's sudden abandonment after the court finalized the divorce. With his medical license under suspension, Don had moved to Arizona, leaving Ruby to face the aftermath alone. She had tried to contact the children, begging for forgiveness, claiming transformation. None of them responded. Over the next year, Clara and Ryan visited Logan one by one. Clara had grown into a thoughtful, expressive artist whose installations touched on themes of trust and identity. Her career was thriving, her spirit grounded. Ryan, with his fascination for software and physics, had developed an analytical mind echoing his father's. His startup in structural analysis was gaining traction, integrating engineering with AI-powered predictions. Despite the scars left by their mother's betrayal, the three siblings built something real, among themselves and with Logan. Their bond was no longer rooted in obligation, but in choice. They shared dinners at Logan's penthouse, celebrated milestones together, and created new traditions that didn't rely on the illusions of the past. Ruby remained a shadow at the periphery. She continued her attempts at re-entry, messages, voicemails, even showing up at Ryan's university once. But her image had deteriorated beyond repair. Former friends avoided her in public. Her social circle had evaporated. The woman who once coordinated garden parties and vacations was now remembered as the architect of her own downfall. Don Harper fared no better. The suspension of his medical license had exposed other inconsistencies in his career: unethical referrals, questionable billing practices, inappropriate relationships with patients. His reputation, once pristine, now carried a permanent mark. He attempted a third marriage in Phoenix, which ended within 2 years after his new wife discovered his past. Isolated and with dwindling income, he now consulted remotely for a medical software firm that kept him far from patients and decision-making. Meanwhile, Logan thrived not for revenge, but for fulfillment. He published a memoir titled Structures That Endure, discussing leadership, ethics, and the value of building something meant to last. He never mentioned Ruby or Don by name. The book was about stability, not spite. He attended Clara's first gallery opening in New York, stood beside Ethan as he married Lena Brooks, and helped Ryan launch his tech firm. He became a grandfather to Claire, Ethan's daughter, and built her a playhouse in his backyard with the same care he had once given to municipal structures. During one of their family dinners, Ryan, now in his final year of graduate studies, asked Logan if he ever regretted how thoroughly he dismantled everything Ruby and Don had planned. Logan answered with a calm shake of the head. Regret was not part of the equation. Their downfall had never been about vengeance. It was simply the natural result of truth intersecting with hubris. What they had tried to steal, family, respect, legacy, could never be faked and certainly not maintained through lies. The true punishment was not legal or financial. It was watching the life they attempted to hijack thrive without them. It was realizing too late that Logan's strength had never been his silence, but his foresight. Ruby remained alone. Her yearly birthday messages to the children went unanswered. The photos in her apartment were outdated, taken during holidays that no longer meant anything. She still followed their lives through public updates and news about Logan's continued success. Each headline a reminder of what could have been hers, had she chosen truth over manipulation. Logan no longer thought about her often. His energy was spent where it mattered. Mentoring new engineers, hosting family dinners, traveling to conferences with Ryan, attending Clara's exhibitions, and reading bedtime stories to Claire. The betrayal that once seemed unbearable had become something else entirely, a foundation for something stronger. Not because it had been erased, but because it had been faced, understood, and ultimately overcome. What Ruby and Don underestimated was simple. The man they believed too focused on buildings to see what was in front of him had, in fact, spent his life learning exactly how and when to dismantle a structure with precision. And so he did.